Hello and welcome to another session of Streaming School. I do apologise for the slight hiccup we had with Captain Guard this morning, just flitting in, and I hope my attempt at holding together an English lesson, having not taught that about letter writing for a while, was in some way competent. We're really lucky to have Mr. Michael Scott with us today to take us in the first of the day's science lesson. A very good morning to you, Michael. How are you?
Good morning, guys. Good morning. How are you all?
Really good. Me and Nisha having adventures with technology, so
yeah, that's it. That adventure will never stop.
This is what you get for trying to use something other than Zoom, Michael.
Yeah, that's why I stick to what I know. Stick to the Google Hangouts. What I know.
Well, changes might be afoot, Michael, but I don't want to freak you out before your lesson. So you tell us when you want us to move across to your screen, and we'll go.
Yeah, I'm ready.
You're a gentleman. Look at that. Born ready, Michael. Born ready.
Born ready.
All right, buddy. The drawing of the gingerbread man, by the way, magnifique.
There you go. Exactly. I thought it was a pretty good human diagram, to be honest. I'm proud of that one. The arms aren't in proportion, but we can make do.
It's not the worst.
Thank you, Nisha. Someone's got my back.
God bless you.
Okay. God
bless you, man.
Nice. All right. So in our last biology lesson, we were looking at pathogens. We spoke about pathogens being these microorganisms that cause disease. We looked at 4 different types of pathogen. We looked at bacteria, we looked at virus, we looked at fungi, and we also looked at protist. And we was talking about the ways that bacteria make us feel ill by the production of toxins. We also spoke about how viruses, and obviously the virus that's at the front of everyone's mind is the coronavirus. We spoke about how the viruses have this ability to invade the cells. They get inside of the cell, kind of like injecting its DNA into the cell to replicate. And obviously it's that invasion of cells that makes it very difficult to actually destroy a virus. If the corona wasn't a virus and it was a bacteria, we could quite simply just take some antibiotics and the world would continue ticking. The problem with it being a virus is that viruses are inside of the cell, and you can't destroy the virus without actually destroying your cells. So that presents problems. But in today's lesson, the plan for us today is to cover how we can defend ourselves from pathogens. And the human body is designed to protect us from pathogens and to prevent the entry of pathogens. And we're going to take a look at just 4 of them. We're going to take a look at the nose. We're going to take a look at the trachea. The trachea is the pipe that kind of leads to the bronchi, which ultimately go to your lungs. We're also going to take a look at the stomach, and we'll also look at the skin. These are just 4 barriers to pathogens, to stop pathogens from actually entering the bloodstream. So first of all, let's start off with the nose. You'll notice that your nose contains hairs. These hairs are designed to actually trap any pathogens that you may breathe in through your nose. It's very difficult for pathogens to get through those hairs, and they ultimately end up getting trapped. And then when we blow our nose, then the pathogens come out with whatever you blow out of your nose. We also have a trachea. Now, the trachea, again, is adapted to minimize any pathogens that may come into our body, through our breathing. And the trachea has two adaptations. Just like the nose, the trachea has these really small hairs. These are, microscopic hairs that we call cilia. And these cilia kind of act as little brushes, and they're constantly brushing and moving any debris or any pathogens that may get trapped in the trachea. So that's one way of kind of stopping pathogens from entering. But the trachea also produces a thick mucus. This mucus is very thick, it's very sticky, and it's able to trap any pathogens in the trachea. And then, these small hairs, these cilia, can kind of waft the mucus away. And then we can either end up spitting it out. And that's when we see the kind of coughs where we get rid of a lot of that phlegm. Another way of protecting or defending your body from pathogens is the stomach, because the stomach produces hydrochloric acid. And for the chemists out there, hydrochloric acid is HCl. The hydrochloric acid is used to destroy any pathogens that may be on the food. Let's say that the food was undercooked, or food has been reheated, then the stomach produces this acid to destroy any of those pathogens that may be on the food. Finally, we also have skin, and the skin acts as a barrier to pathogens. It's the first barrier that we have to pathogens, and the skin is designed to stop pathogens from entering and getting into our blood. Now, the skin is so intricately designed that even if you get a break in your skin, let's say that you cut yourself, and there's a cut right there. Let's say you cut yourself, and now your bloodstream is exposed, or there's a break in the skin where pathogens can now enter. The skin forms scabs. The blood forms a clot, and that clot dries and forms a scab, and that scab is another barrier to pathogens. But unfortunately, we know that people get ill, people get sick, which means that the pathogen has been able to get past the nose, or it's been able to get past the trachea, or get past the skin, or get past the stomach. And ultimately, when those pathogens get past these barriers, they end up in your bloodstream, and this is where it causes a lot of problems. Now, we have a second line of defense, and this second line of defense is called the immune system. And your immune system consists of white blood cells. Now, it won't be enough at your GCSE just to mention white blood cells, because there are two main types that you need to know. There are a lot more white blood cells, but at GCSE, you only need to know about two of them. The two white blood cells that you need to know about, and I'll change the color. The first white blood cell that you need to know about is something called a phagocyte. And you know, I kind of think of a phagocyte as like Pac-Man, and I'm really showing my age here because I bet half of the listeners have no idea what Pac-Man is. But Pac-Man used to be this game that, you know, moves around the board and kind of eats or engulfs these little dots. And that's exactly what the phagocyte does. If you imagine that this small little purple dot here, that's our pathogen, well, the phagocyte kind of chases down the pathogen. And if you look at the next picture here, you can see now, look, that the pathogen has been engulfed. And that's the key word that, I hope if I spelled it right. This is the key word that you would have to use in your exam. So we would say that the pathogen engulfs, sorry, the phagocyte engulfs the pathogen. We also have another white blood cell, which is called the lymphocyte. And the lymphocyte is responsible for creating antibodies. Now, I'm going to be pitching this next part at anyone kind of doing the higher tier paper, because to really understand how antibodies work, you've got to get into some higher level biology, and typically anyone who's doing, you know, the triple biology or the higher paper in biology, you would definitely need to listen up to this part. So we have cells, okay? Our body is made up of cells, and on the surface of these cells, these are our body cells. On the surface of our cells, we have something called an antigen. Now, an antigen is just a specific protein that is on the surface of this cell. And each of us have, you know, a different antigen that corresponds to our body. So when a foreign pathogen or a foreign invader comes in the body, I'm just going to draw a bacterium here. So there's a bacterium. And if you look at the surface of this bacterium, you will notice, look, that the antigen is a different shape. The antigen is totally different from the antigen in our body cells. And the white blood cell is able, or the lymphocyte to be more specific, the lymphocyte is able to recognize that, wait a second, this antigen doesn't belong to the body. So what the lymphocyte can actually do, and here's the lymphocyte, what the lymphocyte can actually do is start to create these antibodies. These antibodies. And you'll notice that the antibodies are specific to the antigen. So these antibodies that have been produced by the lymphocyte, they're able to join onto the antigen right there. They can join onto it. These antibodies are specific to different antigens. And it's these antibodies that can destroy the pathogen. Now, the lymphocytes not only create antibodies, but they also create something called an antitoxin. Remember, we spoke about in our previous video, our previous biology lesson, we spoke about this idea of bacteria producing toxins, and it's the toxins that make us feel, really, really ill. Well, the lymphocytes create an antitoxin, and the purpose of the antitoxin is to counteract the toxins from bacteria. And when you can counteract those toxins from bacteria, then we start to feel much better. We start to feel on the mend. And I think I've got just enough time to cover our last defense. And this one is more of a proactive defense, because sometimes, when a pathogen enters the body, depending on the pathogen, that pathogen can be quite harmful to us. And unfortunately, some pathogens are very, very deadly and can actually, they can actually be fatal before these antibodies are made. So, it's unfortunate because the production of these antibodies does take some time, and some pathogens are actually more fatal than others, and they don't actually give the body time to make the antibodies, and can cause death very quickly. And again, that's the problem that we have with the coronavirus. So there's one other kind of line of defense, and as I said, this one's a bit more proactive. And you may have heard of a vaccine. And I just want to kind of go through with you guys today exactly what a vaccine is. Now, you are given a vaccine via a needle, via an injection, but there's a lot of kind of conspiracies and ideas about what actually is inside of a vaccine. Well, a vaccine contains a weak or dead version of the disease. So what's actually being injected into people is a weakened or dead version of the actual disease. Now, if you actually think about what we looked at on our previous page, which I'll go back to, remember I said that each pathogen has its own specific antigen. So if we are injecting a dead or a weakened version of that pathogen into the body, well, that gives your lymphocytes time to create antibodies. because remember that each pathogen has its own antigen, and sometimes that pathogen can be deadly. So if we can inject a weak version of that pathogen or a dead version of that pathogen into people, it gives them time for their lymphocytes to create antibodies. And the advantage of this is that if the real pathogen turns up, then this is the magic. You can quickly produce the antibodies. And that's because your lymphocytes have already made those antibodies once. When they've made them once because of the vaccine. If the real pathogen turns up, a year later, for example, your lymphocytes have already made the antibodies once, so they can very quickly make the antibodies a second time, and potentially saving lives. But this isn't something for your GCSE, but just to bear in mind, the whole process of producing a vaccine is a very long and expensive process. And obviously that's the problem that the government are facing today regarding the coronavirus. So just in recap, there are 3 ways that we can defend ourselves from pathogens. We have the human body, the nose, the trachea, the stomach, the skin. If the pathogen gets past any of those barriers, then your immune system kicks into play. Your immune system is made up of white blood cells. There are 2 types of white blood cells, and you need to learn what both types of white blood cells do. And we can also have a more proactive defense, which involves something called a vaccine. And a vaccine is just a dead or weak version of that disease. It gives your immune system to create that antibodies, so that if the real disease turns up, they can quickly, and I'm not underlining that word because that's a key word that you should use. They can quickly produce these antibodies. All right, guys, have a good day.
Thanks, Mike. Much appreciated. How relevant as well, telling us about corona.
Yeah, that's what I did kind of think to...
Tell me what's in your mind, Mike. Tell me what you really feel.
I did kind of think to tie that in, but yeah, it's definitely relevant. A lot of what you see online, vaccines and so forth. So yeah, hopefully it's enlightening someone.
Probably a silly question, but for you as a scientist, is that interesting for you? Like people suddenly be so interested in and almost obsessed by our ability to actually do science well.
Yeah. Say that again. Say that again. I'm sorry.
Is it interesting for you as a scientist to be interested in the country finally, not watching so much Love Island or whatever other nonsense? They're much more interested in the ability for scientists to test, for the NHS to treat, and for researchers to actually produce vaccines.
Yeah, I'm not saying that we all have to be super chemists like me.
Never miss an opportunity to be humble, Mike. Never miss an opportunity to be humble.
No, I do. I'm a strong believer that, look, if people don't have scientific literature, if they're not scientifically literate, and when you're watching the news, you can be swayed left and right if you're not of sound understanding of the science. And that's what I think is really important.
Yeah, sorry, Mike, Amira distracted me.
No, that's okay, so that's all right. But yeah, no, I just think it's important that because a lot of the times a lot of people never kind of revisit science after they've left school. So when they start to see stuff online about vaccines and disease and perhaps injecting disinfectants will work, or people just need to understand. People need to really understand that, look, this is how the body works. This is how it's just having that understanding of how things work, and I think that's what's important.
Yeah. Nah, we'll never do that.
Huh?
People will never do that.
We'll never do that. Hopefully, we don't know. We can only hope.
Yeah, I'll leave you with your optimism, Mike. Obviously, lockdown has changed you. So yeah, keep it up.
I'm more reflective. I'm more positive about the human race.
Not having to walk around sniffing every day has
maybe
made you feel more positive.
Maybe there's some hope.
Yeah, maybe. All right. Sorry for the segue. Nish, it's all yours. Thanks, Mike.
Nice one. Right. Take care, guys. Take care.
Thank you. All right. So here is the optional task for biology today. It is, what is the difference between a lymphocyte and a phagocyte? If you want to catch up on any of the previous sessions, you can look on Facebook and on YouTube, and all the tasks and links to any resources are on there as well. Up next, we have our second science session of the day. It's chemistry.
Brilliant. And that's at 12 o'clock.
That is, yeah.
We are racing through it today. All right. I'll catch you very shortly, my dear.
Yeah, see you there.